I want to talk for a minute about an important meta issue that's present behind the scenes in the Pascal wager. And it could be framed in the form of an objection, but I'll just list it here as a question. Is belief under our control? Is belief under our control? In other words, are your beliefs something that you can actually control by an exercise of your will? Okay, for instance, just to show you guys that maybe some beliefs aren't under our control, I can close my eyes right now, and I can imagine myself at home in my living room, and maybe my kids are watching the TV and my wife is fixing dinner and I'm sitting there on the couch. Okay, and maybe I can tell myself that that's where in fact I am right now. But as soon as I open my eyes, I recognize that I'm actually in a classroom at this time. And it's not my living room at home at all. No matter how hard I try, when I shut my eyes and imagine myself being in my living room, I cannot convince myself that I am in fact in my living room, because the reality I know to be different. Okay, so this does not appear to be a belief that is under my will, that is under the control of my will. It is actually a belief that seems to be outside of my control. And it could be argued that there are a whole bunch of beliefs that are in fact outside of our control. So for instance, suppose that I'm standing on the edge of a precipice, okay, and I look ahead of me, and they're about 8 feet away. We'll say 7 feet. I'm not sure if I could broad jump 8 feet. Okay, we'll say 7 feet away is another ledge. And I could jump to that other ledge and be safe, supposing I have to cross over. And this is a pretty sizable jump, right? 7 feet, broad jump. Maybe I can't get a running start. It's a pretty sizable jump. Now, I believe real hard that I can make this jump happen. Okay, suppose I tell myself in my mind, this jump is going to happen. I can make this happen. To some extent, perhaps by believing it real hard, I can make it more likely. But in the end, it could be argued that the belief and the reality are not necessarily going to match up by an act of my will. In other words, believe as hard as I might, if that ledge is far enough away, I always know at the back of my mind that it's not a jump that I could make. Okay, although of course to some extent by believing it really hard, you can make it more likely that you would make it than would otherwise be the case. Okay, is belief under our control? And so the objection could be leveled, well, actually belief in God's existence is not something that's under our control. It's shaped by influences around us in the culture. It's shaped by other forces. If you look at the statistical studies, the great majority of human beings down through history have believed things that the persons around them have believed. Okay, and humans are incredibly social in their beliefs about things. We are highly susceptible to social pressure when it comes to our beliefs about things. And so because of these statistical realities, it could be argued that the assumption that Pascal seems to have here in laying the wager out there is that belief is something that is under our control. But the objection could be leveled that actually belief is not something that we can shape by an act of will. Okay, so I thought I'd throw that out there for just a minute. Do you guys think that your beliefs are under your control? Can you actually choose what to believe and what not to believe? What do we think? Are some beliefs under our control and others are not? Yes. So some are under our control and others are not. Okay, all right. I think that's a good comment. I would say if there is cultural space for multiple different views on a particular issue, then we tend to have more control over our beliefs on that issue. But if there's no cultural space for it, then we tend not to have control over our beliefs on the issue. For instance, let me just throw something out there that's going to make everybody really uncomfortable. If you had lived in the antebellum American South prior to the Civil War, do you think you would have been opposed to slavery? No, you would have been in favor of slavery, right? Sure. Sure. Yeah, and I think if most of us were honest with ourselves, I mean, genuinely honest with ourselves, assuming that we were not among the slaves at the time, in which case we probably would have been opposed to slavery. But if we were honest with ourselves, most of us would probably have to admit, yes, if I lived at that time in that culture where there was not space for being opposed to slavery, I almost certainly would have been in favor of slavery. And this is like, this makes us all real uncomfortable. It's like, whoa. I don't like to imagine myself as being that way. And yet human beings are so incredibly social in terms of our beliefs and in terms of what we believe, what we think to be the case. The reality is that almost all of us tend to conform to whatever the general beliefs, prevailing beliefs are in the culture. Okay, if there's cultural space for multiple different perspectives, for disagreement with a particular dominant point of view, then, maybe that belief is to some extent under our control. But if there's no cultural space at all for multiple perspectives, if there's just one view that everyone pretty much has to have, then that's not really a belief that's under our control. Okay, having thrown that bomb out there and seeing what people have to say about it, does anyone want to push back and say that there is space, like you can? Like, does anyone think you wouldn't have been opposed to slavery if you lived at that time? Or, supposing a different culture, does anyone think that if you had lived in the Aztec era as an Aztec, you would have been opposed to human sacrifices? No, you would have been in favor of them, right? Be opposed? But there's no cultural space for you to be opposed, right? Yeah, well, I'd like to think that I would be opposed, but given the social nature of our beliefs, I think that it would be incredibly hard for me to convince myself that I would it's correct to go against everybody else in the culture. Does that make sense? People are so social and under, belief is so susceptible to social pressure that if everybody else says, well, you're wrong, it's really hard for us to say against that, no, I'm not, I'm right. I don't know. Anybody else? Okay. Flat Earth.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that say the belief of flat Earth is the correct belief, but it's a social,
Oh, there's no cultural space for that belief at this time. Yeah, people are not allowed to believe that right now.
But here people are trying to hold up that belief and all that.
Right. There are actually people out there that hold the Flat Earth Society or something like that. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, there's a whole.
That's incredible. Okay. Well, I didn't realize that. Yeah. No. For almost everybody, that belief is it's out of bounds. You cannot believe that these days. Yes. Cultures exercise control over their members, And generally speaking, the beliefs that are, I mean, you got to be careful talking about culture as this like institution trying to protect itself, but generally speaking, cultures want to protect themselves against opposing points of view. And if a belief is dangerous to the majority of the culture, they will ensure, like the culture as a whole will ensure that that belief is not allowed. It will take steps to eliminate the holders of that belief to prevent them from, holding positions of prominence or from maybe even jail them if it wants to go that far, or execute them in some cases to make sure that those beliefs are not allowed because those beliefs could be a danger to the culture. And in circumstances like that, almost everybody conforms, and it's not accurate to say that your belief is under your control. It's actually something that is being shaped by the culture. I might have shared this example with you guys before, but just to illustrate the social nature of belief. Okay, so I'm a happily married husband, father of 3, soon to be 4. I've been married now for nearly 10 years. Okay, nearly 10 years. And as far as I know, my wife is a faithful spouse. Okay, but suppose that I go to church next Sunday and someone tells me, I heard about the affair that your wife had. I'm sorry. And I'm like, what? She didn't have an affair? And then someone else tells me later that day, I heard about the affair. I'm sorry, that must be difficult for you. And I'm like, what? Two different people have told me? And then like multiple people then throughout the next week or the next 2 weeks all tell me, like this must be a hard time for your family. We're aware of the difficulties you guys are going through at this time. So I'm sorry that you have to be in that position. It would be really hard for me to sustain the belief that my wife is a faithful spouse under those kinds of circumstances, would it not? Because belief is incredibly susceptible to social pressure. And if enough other people say that a certain thing is the case, the vast majority of human beings go along with it and agree that yes, that must be the case. And the only reason at the end of the day why they're saying that that is the case is because others have told them that that is the case. Okay, very few people, almost nobody, has the, the fortitude or the self-possession to hold a belief that all or almost all of the people in their surroundings do not hold. Okay, the vast majority of us capitulate. Okay, so the objection could be made that belief is not under our control. I would respond on Pascal's behalf to this objection that belief in the moment is not under our control. Okay, I don't think that the feeling of believing something is susceptible to my control in this moment. However, what I have found, having lived for some time, is that over a long period of time, if there is cultural space for a particular belief, you can come to hold that belief by means of your practices and habits. Okay, so Pascal was once asked, well, suppose I can't make myself believe in God. Pascal was asked, what do I do in such a circumstance? And Pascal said, you go to Mass. You pray the Psalter. You go to Mass. You give charitably to the impoverished. You do the things that you would do if you believed in God. And over time, what you will find is that belief will arise within you. And you will come to believe in God by having engaged in the practices that one does when one believes in God. Okay, and that's probably true for basically all things and all beliefs. Okay, you do what you would do if you had a certain belief, and over time you will acquire that belief. Okay, I think that's probably a general principle. Okay, just as Aristotle said, if you want to be a self-controlled person, then you act as a self-controlled person would act, and over time you will become a self-controlled person. So also, I think what Pascal was saying was, look, if you want to believe in God but can't make yourself in the moment believe in God, that's just like wanting to have self-control but not having self-control. So what you do is you engage in the practices that one does when one believes in God, and over time you will find that belief arises within you. Okay, so I guess in response to the question, is belief under our control, I would say, as long as there is cultural space for a particular belief, it can be under our control over a long period of time, although maybe not in the moment. The feeling of believing it is not something that we can necessarily control in the moment, for what it's worth. Okay, any reflections or comments on that?
Would this be the same as saying if you tell yourself something is true over the span of a certain time, eventually you believe that that is true?
If you tell yourself that something is true and act on it. Okay, so just as if you decide you want to be self-controlled and act on that decision, you will over time become self-controlled. So also if you decide you want to believe, I don't know, pick a belief, right? If you decide that you want to believe in God in this case and act on it, then over time you will find faith arising within you, is I think the lesson that Pascal was trying to impart. Yes?
How long do you have to continue to live as you believe?
Yeah. So presumably at the beginning there would be cognitive dissonance, and you'd be going through the motions, and you'd be like, I'm doing this because I trust that faith will arise within me after a certain period of time doing this. I assume that it would be different for different people. But probably it's the sort of thing that would happen within a reasonably short period of time. Not maybe a month or two, but a year or two, I would assume. I don't know. It would probably be different for different people. Are there any beliefs that any of us hold that are substantially different than the culturally dominant beliefs that we're willing to share? Does anybody have a belief that is substantially different than the beliefs of your peers or the beliefs of the general culture that you're willing to actually be courageous enough to share?
Sure, why not? You have the right to be offended.
You have the right to be offended?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? It was like true confessions moment. Most of us just kind of go along, don't we? We just want to keep our head down and just get along, It's I just want to try to advance in life, and and to advance in life, of course, you have to hold dominant beliefs. That's one of the requirements for professional advancement, for sure, and other kinds of advancement in life as well, is that you have to hold dominant beliefs. If it's hard to think of a belief that you hold that is substantially different than the dominant beliefs in the culture, then you probably would have supported slavery. Isn't that an uncomfortable thought?
You made a jump somewhere.
No, I didn't. If it's hard for us to, if we are such conformists that it's hard for us to think of any beliefs that we hold that are different than the dominant beliefs of the culture, then we probably at different historical epochs would have held the dominant beliefs of the culture at those times. Do you guys think there are beliefs that are dominant in our culture right now that future generations will find morally abhorrent? Do you think such things exist? Do you think our culture, as a dominant belief, holds ideas that future generations will say, this was so bad, these people were so bad, that we just want to knock their statues down and dissociate ourselves from them? Yes? What? Cancel culture?
Yeah.
This is
little things,
right?
Of course, it's canceling that should be done, but then there's oh, you don't agree with this, cancel. I don't
Yeah, some of the hyper-vigilance of the cancel culture, police forces and stuff like that. Yeah, that might seem to future generations to be absurd to us.
When will anti-vaxxers go away?
Those people, I disagree with those people. I'm a vaxxer, but those people have been able to sustain their beliefs for a while in the face of evidence, for sure. Yeah, I mean, so I was over in the Rice Library, Rice University Library, not too long ago, and was thumbing through some of their old periodicals, you know, the campus newspaper from the 1930s, and I saw a bunch of cigarette ads, and they all promoted the health of the cigarettes, like the healthfulness of cigarette smoking. It's good for your lungs, it soothes the nerves, it feels good, and apparently this was a widespread belief at the time. That was like the dominant belief at the time, was that cigarette smoking was actually a healthful thing to do. And it just struck me as really bizarre because, of course, you know, now we know what was really going on for all those people. But it'll be interesting to see going forward what beliefs are currently held in the culture that future generations will find abhorrent. All right, now that those uncomfortable reflections are done, I am going to move beyond the stuff that will be on the test on Friday, and I'm going to go ahead and start Hume today. Is that okay with everybody? Anybody have any questions about Friday's test? It's going to cover Descartes and Pascal, and it will be predominantly Descartes. It will be the smallest test of the semester. It will be about 70% Descartes, 30% Pascal. Okay, I'll be sending out a review sheet tonight or before the end of the day. But just as an FYI, the review sheet's probably not going to list much that you don't already know. But it will be something that might serve as a guide to your studies. Let me now turn to a new thinker for today. In fact,